So it's 10 o'clock. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending our preservation office hours. The way that these office hours started, just a little background for you all, is last year I traveled around to various sites in the Southern Tier to conduct pop-up office hours for the Preservation League. And these were an opportunity for historic homeowners and property owners to come on in and ask the questions that they had about historic tax credits and about building rehabilitation. So since we're unable to do in-person pop-up office hours now, we've moved to the virtual space. So this is your opportunity to ask questions that you may have about rehabilitating your historic house, especially as it pertains to historic tax credits. So I'll give you a little bit of information on that. The Preservation League does have a webinar series specifically about historic tax credits. So those webinars would cover in a little more detail exactly how the historic tax credit program works in New York State. So I urge you to tune into those webinars if you're interested in more detail on tax credits. So let's get started. Today's agenda, we will cover what? We'll talk a little bit about the Preservation League and what we do. And what it means to live in a historic district. We'll talk about cost-effective efficiency upgrades that you can make to your historic house and how you can obtain help paying for this rehabilitation work through historic tax credits. We'll talk a little bit about hiring qualified professionals to work on your house or do it yourself. And finally, this program will work best if you ask lots of questions. So even throughout my presentation, if you have any questions, there are two ways that you can ask your questions. You should have a button at the bottom of your screen that says raise hand. If you raise your hand, I'll be notified, and then I'll hand over vocal controls to you and you can ask your question verbally. If you'd rather type your question, please use the Q&A, also located at the bottom of your screen. So you click on the Q&A, you can type your question at any time and we'll get to it as soon as we can. So we'll go ahead and get started. So the Preservation League of New York State is the statewide nonprofit organization working for historic preservation. We've been around since 1974. We were founded by a group of grassroots preservationists who decided we needed a unified voice for preservation in Albany. Why in Albany? Well, because that's where policy is made for our state. So the Preservation League is located in Albany, in a 140-year-old granary building, and we serve all 62 counties of New York State. Today I'm coming to you from Bristol, New York, where I live. I'm the Southern Tier field consultant for the Preservation League, and most of my work takes place in the counties in the Southern Tier of New York. So that's mainly my territory, but we cover the entire state. The Preservation League has some focus areas. We do our best work in Albany on public policy. So we have dedicated staff members who work in our Capitol, working for a preservation policy. We make sure that historic preservation always has a seat at the table as it pertains to economic development and sustainable development in our towns and cities across the state. We give out excellence awards, recognizing preservation projects that are well done. We protect threatened resources through our 7 to Save program. This is a biennial program shining a light on endangered properties, and this brings more public awareness to the plight of those properties, and it also brings enhanced technical services from the Preservation League. We give grants and loans. So we have 2 grant programs a year. Our technical assistance grants and Preserve New York grant program. This is a partnership that we have with the New York State Council on the Arts, and we provide grants for preservation planning projects. So surveys and engineering studies on buildings and cultural landscapes. We also give out loans. So our Endangered Properties Intervention Program is an emergency loan program when you can't obtain another loan to save your building. These are up to $200,000. We provide technical services and educational outreach all across the state. That's what I'm doing today in this webinar. So Hopefully you'll learn lots about energy efficiency and historic buildings today. And finally, we work with preservation colleagues all around the state. We work with those little preservation groups in your towns and cities to help bring enhanced services to your area and help bring quality programming to your part of the state through working with our preservation colleagues. So you might be familiar with your colleagues in one part of the state or the other. Historic Ithaca, Preservation Association of the Southern Tier, Preservation Association of Central New York, Preservation Buffalo Niagara, so on and so forth. But from Buffalo to Long Island and everywhere in between, we're working hand in hand with your local preservation organizations. So I want to talk a little bit about historic districts and National Register historic listings, because when it comes to historic tax credits, in order to obtain tax credit money for your projects, your house needs to be either listed individually or as part of a National Register historic district. One of the things that the Preservation League does is provides grants to help enable the creation of historic districts all across the state. So one recent example is from Jamestown, New York, where they have 3 historic districts in the making or already listed. And these were made possible through Preserve New York grants from the Preservation League. So in 2015, we gave just over $9,000 for the National Register nomination of the Lakeview Avenue Historic District. And we followed that up in 2018 for an intensive survey. Now this survey is a look at all the historic resources or historic buildings in an area with the intention of eventually listing that area on the National Register as well. And then just last year, we gave a grant for the National Register nomination of another neighborhood in Jamestown, the Forest Heights Historic District. What this means for Jamestown and for its homeowners is that it gives people living in those historic districts access to historic tax credits to help maintain their historic homes. This slide takes a little while to load, but why would we preserve? Because preservation contributes to sustainable development. Holding on to old housing stock and rehabilitating it is it's much better for the environment and is more sustainable than tearing down and constructing new. Historic preservation also helps preserve a community's character and cultural heritage and sense of identity. Historic preservation contributes to smart, sustainable economic development and provides eligibility for state and federal funds for historic rehabilitation. So what makes historic preservation green? Well, lack of waste is one big reason. So what you see in front of you is an example of Eckerd drugstores located in various buildings. The building on the left and on the bottom are both purpose-built buildings, standalone structures just for Eckerd. And you can see that the building on the left has a highly identifiable architecture, so it was built specifically to be an Eckerd drugstore. Both of those buildings are now vacant. So they were built specifically for the drugstore, and now they're sitting empty. Now, the building on the right is located in Whitney Point, which is not a designated historic district, but it's chock full of historic buildings and could probably be listed if somebody wanted to pursue that there. But the Eckerd located in that historic building is flanked by other businesses. When customers come to that Eckerd, they can also walk to other businesses along the street. This adds to a walkable community, a sustainable community, where you don't have to get in your car and drive from door to door to door to the businesses that you want to patronize. So it's just a smarter, sustainable development when you're reusing historic buildings that are already there. Not to mention some of the energy efficiency points that we'll be talking about refer to the way that historic buildings are clustered. So the buildings on the right have shared walls and help save on heating costs. And those buildings are already there. The energy that went into building those buildings has already been expended. and will have no further impact on the environment. So that's good news. So what makes historic buildings inherently green? Well, as I just mentioned, the buildings were constructed a long time ago. So sourcing the materials, the construction itself, all that energy has already been expended. Those buildings are there and ready to be rehabilitated and reused. Old buildings tend to make use of natural light through daylighting. So this can be interior glazing on doors to allow light to pass through the building. It can be skylights or simply large windows letting in daylight to cut down on the amount of artificial light needed in the building. Old buildings were also made to work their mechanical systems hand in hand with the inherent features of the building to cut down on the amount of energy that it takes to heat and cool them. So natural ventilation systems, shared walls, masonry walls, all these things contribute to a building being economically or energy efficient. So, oh, someone does not see my slides. Well, I'm not sure why. Hopefully you can see them now. Let me know if you can't. All right. Let me ask Darren, can you see my slides?
The only thing I can see is the preservation brief with the yellow house, yellow farmhouse.
Oh, man. Okay, let me see what's happening with my screen share. Apologize. Let's see what's happening here. Oh, okay. Let's try this. All right, did anything change?
Got it now. Very
awesome. Good. Thank you for the heads up from our anonymous attendee. So we're looking at slides pertaining to why historic buildings are green and why historic preservation is a good idea for energy efficiency. So going down our list, historic buildings make use of natural ventilation. And this can come in the form of transom windows inside above the doors, windows which sashes open from the bottom and the top. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important later. Shared walls, saving on heating costs, as I've mentioned. Use of local materials that are already there and already part of the building and no longer need to be expended. Also, the controllability of systems in a historic building tends to be a little higher. You can easily adjust the heating and cooling in a historic building. Some newer buildings are over-engineered with systems that are automatic and not always as responsive as you want them to be to rapidly changing atmospheric conditions or weather. So you want to have control of those systems to keep the interior of the building comfortable for yourself. And again, historic buildings were built a long time ago with old growth timbers and dense lumber. So these buildings were built to last. Oftentimes they were just overbuilt. They were built to withstand all kinds of time and use. So they just don't build them like they used to put it that way. So when we're talking about energy efficiency in a historic building, we want to talk a little bit about where you might be losing some of your heat and where some of the inefficiencies might be taking place in a building. And it may surprise you to find that air infiltration is the #1 source of heat loss in a building. So it's not necessarily, the old windows or the old doors or even lack of insulation. We're looking at floors, walls, and ceilings losing heat, but through cracks and infiltration. So oftentimes, caulking and weather stripping can go a long way toward tightening up your building a bit and making it more comfortable to live in. Windows only account for about a 10% loss in heat. We'll talk a little bit about historic windows and the way that you can improve them without replacing them. Your fireplace flue will be a source of some heat loss. Heating ducts, so getting those heating ducts sealed can help significantly in controlling heat loss in your house. Electrical outlets don't really account for a whole lot, even though in the wintertime you can hold your hand in front of them and sometimes feel that chilly air. It's really not having overall a huge effect on the heat loss in your house. And then finally, plumbing penetrations in your house, sealing those up can help stop heat loss as well. So when it comes to energy efficiency upgrades that you can make to your historic house, some things pay off a little more than others. So looking at return on investment for your energy efficiency upgrades, you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, right? You want to have things that are going to pay for themselves in the short term and make it worth your money, and also provide a noticeable effect on the comfort level in your house. But before you get started, it's a good idea to have an energy audit done, because you may be surprised to see that some of the least invasive treatments can go a lot farther in making your house more comfortable. So an energy audit can be free if you qualify, or it can cost a little bit of money, but it's going to be worth it, because an energy audit, when done thoroughly, can give you a roadmap for how to make your house as energy efficient as it can be. The payback on an energy audit can be as little as a year or less. So it's well worth your time and money to get someone in to do an energy audit. NYSERDA, NYS, ERDA, has excellent programs for providing guidance and energy audits for families. That's the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. So Google NYSERDA, and actually I'll be sending you some of these links and resources at the end. So something that I forgot to mention at the beginning of my presentation is that these slides and a whole slew of resources will be sent to you in the days following this presentation. So if you don't want to write these things down, don't worry, I will send them to you. So getting back to our slide, starting with an energy audit is an extremely smart thing to do when you're planning energy efficiency upgrades to your house. Going from there, duct sealing tends to be a cost-effective way to stop heat loss in your house and make it more energy efficient. The payback is only just over 5 years typically, and you'll notice a difference in your annual savings. Insulation is almost always a good idea. So your energy audit will show you where your house might be deficient in insulation. Now, there's some things to consider when you're thinking about adding insulation to your house. First of all, make sure that it's actually called for. So going above what is recommended by code isn't always cost effective or very effective in helping make your house more energy efficient. So use code as a guide, and your energy audit will let you know whether you need to add insulation or not. It's not always necessary. In the walls, it may not be feasible or necessary to add insulation in your walls. There are ways to do it well, and there are ways to things to avoid. And we'll talk a little bit later on where you can find guidance on how and when to add insulation. So when it comes to historic windows were made to last. They were made to be adjustable. They can be sealed so that they're tighter in the wintertime when you don't need to open them. And then you can loosen them up to open them and get them to function in the summertime. It's worthwhile. If your historic windows aren't functioning properly, it is worthwhile to get someone in to look at them, or even undertake the endeavor yourself to maintain them so that they function. Broken weight ropes can be replaced relatively easily. The windows can be tightened up through some adjustments in the sash, and they're worth holding on to. So don't let the vinyl window companies talk you into necessarily replacing your historic windows if they seem inefficient. There are some things you can do. Storm windows can actually make your original windows more efficient than modern replacement windows. So please consider storm windows. They can be added to the outside or the inside of your house, and they can really rack up the annual savings in Energy Plus. And the payback is relatively short for storm windows. So it's certainly something to consider. If you think that your windows are a culprit in heat loss, there are things you can do without having to replace them. A ceiling fan added to your house can make a measurable effect on the comfort level in your home. It can help distribute heat, and it can help keep your house cooler in the summertime. The payback is a little bit longer, but just for sheer comfort, it's almost always worth it if adding a ceiling fan would help. And then sealing and caulking. You know, sometimes it's the simplest solutions that are the best solutions. And when it comes to doing energy efficiency upgrades to your historic house, it's best to start small. So you want to do rehabilitations and upgrades that are going to be the least invasive on your historic home, impacting the historic materials in your home the least, and that will give you the most return on your investment. So looking at some of the aspects of historic houses that were inherently green and inherently made to preserve energy. On the left, you'll see a transom window above a doorway inside a house. These windows were made to facilitate airflow while also maintaining privacy. And they can be helpful for helping vent hot air from certain areas of the house and enhance airflow when you open windows along with your transom windows. The window on the right, you can see the sash is open at the top and the sash is open at the bottom. And this facilitates airflow in the house, allowing heat to escape through the top and fresh air to come in through the bottom. So, you know, these houses were built before air conditioning and oftentimes before central heat. So it really behooved the builders to build them in a way that would maximize comfort in the house, and they really were. And if you utilize these systems that are already built into your house, you can find that they really work very well, especially hand in hand with our more modern technologies now. So, and you can see an ad right there in the center for weather stripping. So easy, even a lady can do it. Adding weather stripping to your house can be a really simple and highly effective way to control heat loss. I know this firsthand. When I first bought my house, it was drafty. And, you know, a couple months of going around and weather sealing and adding caulking improved the comfort level immeasurably in my home. And I really didn't have to do anything else. So sometimes it's the simple solutions that are the best. So when it comes to upgrades and rehabilitations to your home, the costs can really add up. And if you'd like help paying for them, historic tax credits are going to be your best friend. New York State has a historic homeowner tax credit program. This is administered by the State Historic Preservation Office, and it is an incentive program. This is a cash incentive for you to put money into your house, and approved projects will return 20% of your expenditures in the form of the tax credit. If you meet certain income levels, then it comes back to you as a tax return check. So either way, it decreases your income tax liability to New York State, one way or the other, whether through decreasing the amount of taxes you owe or coming back to you in the form of a tax return. So that's how it's different from a deduction. It's better than a deduction, cold hard cash to help you pay for these upgrades to your house. In order to qualify for historic tax credits, your house has to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places or located in a historic district. You might be surprised to find that you're located in a historic district. If you don't know, there are ways to find out. If you're not sure, you can always ask us and we can help you do the research to find out. And being located in a National Register Historic District is not necessarily the same as being located in a locally landmarked district. So it's a good idea to check to be sure before you embark on your tax credit journey. We can help you with that. The State Historic Preservation Office can also help you with that. And I'll be providing some contact information for them if you'd like to pursue this. And again, the Preservation League provides grants. So if you think that your house really should be in a historic district and it's not, historic districts are always being updated, expanded, added to. So if you really think that your house deserves to be National Register listed, there are ways to see if that's possible, and there are grants available to help make it happen. So your projects, in order to qualify for historic tax credits, need to be pre-approved by the State Historic Preservation Office. This is a really important point. So before you start on your project, if you wish to take a historic tax credit for it, you need to get it pre-approved with the State Historic Preservation Office first. This is through Part 1 and Part 2 of the historic tax credit application process. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The process is pretty user-friendly. And in fact, the state has simplified and streamlined the process in the past year or so. So if you've done this in the past and thought it was a nightmare, go back and check it out again because it's significantly easier to access now. The work that you do on your house needs to meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitating historic properties. And I will provide a link to those standards so that you can check them out. It's a good idea anyway, even if you're not going to pursue tax credits, the Secretary of Interior standards will help guide you in your projects on your historic house so that you don't make any missteps or mistakes that might forever alter the historic fabric of your home. And finally, you want to make sure that you're meeting all local ordinances and zoning regulations. And if you get a building permit, then that's all pretty much built in. So the eligible expenses for historic tax credits are a minimum of $5,000. So you want to make sure that you plan for at least $5,000 worth of work before you pursue your tax credits. This can be spread out over a couple of years. You don't have to spend that $5,000 all in one year in order to take the tax credits. So you can, spread this out over a couple of years and take the credits at the end. A minimum of 5% of the amount that you spend needs to be on the exterior of your house. This is a public benefit and it's for beautification. So it can be paint, it can be shutters if they're appropriate for your house. Anything on the exterior qualifies as long as it meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. And these projects, however, cannot include landscaping, sidewalks, paving, anything like that. So it's basically the envelope of the house, anything attached to the house, and projects on the interior of the house as long as they're not appliances. Now, an important point to make right now would be that the HVAC system in your house does qualify. So if you need a new boiler, furnace, air conditioning system, if you're interested in pursuing alternative forms of heat like geothermal, these things all qualify. You would have to pre-approve them through the State Historic Preservation Office, of course. So just to recap the tax credit program, it's a financial incentive for historic preservation. It's a big win for historic homeowners to be able to access these tax credits and help you pay for your projects. Tax credits encourage private investment for healthy development of communities and for maintaining a stock of historic buildings that are usable and rehabilitated. This is vital for the rehabilitation or for the revitalization of cities and main streets in upstate New York. We all know how important that is. And this helps preserve architecture that's unique to each community. So you want to maintain that architecture that gives your community a sense of identity. Historic tax credits also help drive job growth. So the people who work on your house, the people who sell the materials that you're buying for it, all down the line, all benefit in one way or the other from historic tax credits. It's one of the most common sense development programs in our state because it is a dollar for dollar investment in our historic resources. You just can't lose. So the State Historic Preservation Office's application process for the historic homeowner tax credits is a three-step process. Part 1 determines the eligibility of your house. Part 2 determines the eligibility of your projects. This is just a plan. You're laying out what the current conditions are, what needs to be done, and how much you estimate that it's going to cost. You submit those two parts. SHPO looks it over. They give you the green light, and then you can embark on your projects. When you're finished, you submit part 3, and that's just lots of photographs. Photographs are important in this application process, and you're showing what you did and how it turned out, and then you get your tax credits. In order to take your tax credits in the current tax year, you want to plan your projects in your application so that you're submitting part 3, so the finished product, in October, by about October of that year. If you go over, it's no big deal, but they may not be able to process your application until the following year. So you'll get your tax credits, but not necessarily in the year that you want unless you get things all submitted by about October. So when you're starting to think about some of the rehabilitation projects you want to do in your house, there are some sources of guidance that are necessary really for adhering to the Secretary of the Interior standards. So the standards themselves are available. All these things are available online. You can download PDF versions of these and print them out if you'd like to have something printed to look at. But the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties provides the guidelines that the State Historic Preservation Office uses to evaluate projects. So they'll be looking at the same document that you'll be using as your guiding document for your project. So it's really important to get your hands on this and to take a look at these standards. As it pertains specifically to energy efficiency upgrades, the National Park Service has released the illustrated guidelines on sustainability for rehabilitating historic buildings. This is a useful website, and right now I'm going to show you that website. So this may be what you were seeing before when my slides were not showing up. All right, so this is the website I'm referring to. These guidelines are a set of recommendations and things to avoid when it comes to certain treatments of your historic house. So they've got topics on the left from planning, read that first, and then seasonal maintenance, treatment of your windows, weatherization, so that's what we're talking largely about today, recommended treatments versus things that are not recommended. So it helps guide you in your thinking when you're planning these projects for your house. We've got a section on insulation, HVAC systems, and even new energy technologies like solar, wind power. I think they covered geothermal in this as well. But when you're thinking about alternative energies like solar, wind power, geothermal, it's a good idea to determine whether that's really going to be your best option. When it comes to energy efficiency upgrades, simple is better. For your historic house, it's less invasive. You have less of a chance of disturbing the historic fabric of your house when you're keeping things simple with weather stripping, caulking, trying to control heat loss through infiltrations first. That should always be your first line of defense after your energy audit, and then reevaluate and see what you need to do from there. If you need a more efficient furnace, that might be the way to go. Going full solar with panels on your house may not even be worth it's a big investment going into it. It can disturb the historic look of your house and therefore would not be approved by the State Historic Preservation Office. They will approve solar under certain conditions, but it may not be necessary. So if you're thinking that these things are the way to go, rethink it, reevaluate after doing some simpler techniques first, and then see what happens after that. Another resource for historic homeowners is preservation briefs from the National Park Service. There's a whole series of these. There are 50 of them. You can see them right here. The one that I have up on the screen is specific for today, improving your energy efficiency in your building. So this is a fairly easy read, and it provides a lot of guidance on where to begin and how to proceed in making your historic home more efficient. So we're going to go back to our slides. I want to encourage you to ask any questions that you have as we go along by either raising your hand or typing into the Q&A. These 3 resources that I'm showing you here will be available after this presentation in my follow-up email to you all. Now, when it comes to the work that you plan to do on your historic property, it's important to choose a contractor. If you decide not to do it yourself, choose your contractor wisely. If you're not sure how to find somebody who's qualified to work on a historic house, take a walk around a historic neighborhood, talk to other homeowners, and see who did the work on their houses. Oftentimes, word of mouth is the way you're going to find out about these folks. Sometimes they may put a sign. So I have a picture of a sign that was right out in front of a house getting some work done. A builder and renovator who specializes in historic properties. So you can also check out our list of consultants. Now, the Preservation League doesn't maintain a list of contractors necessarily, but we do maintain a list of building consultants who have worked successfully on our funded programs, and they maintain their own list regionally of contractors. So it doesn't hurt to reach out to them and ask for recommendations there. Once you find a contractor you think you might be happy with, ask for references, make sure that other people have been happy with their work. And finally, talk to them about the Secretary of the Interior standards. If they're not willing to work within those, or they try to talk you out of it, move on, for the sake of your historic house. So again, if you have any questions, please type them now into your Q&A or raise your hand. I'd be happy to hand over audio control so you can ask your question. And now I'm going to hand things over to Darren Tracy. Darren is my guest speaker today. He's the principal from West Branch Consulting and Engineering. Hi, Darren. He's been in construction for over 30 years. He's done a lot of projects that are relevant to today's discussion. So he's going to show you a project that he was recently involved in. And again, if you have questions anytime during his presentation, please feel free to ask. So Darren, feel free to share. Certainly, let me stop sharing and feel free to share your slides.
Okay, I will. And there is one question that you can respond to in the Q&A. It's regarding the applicability of the funding for organizations, not just residences. You may want to take a look at that, question number 1.
Yes, indeed. Oh, thank you. So we have a question from Jessica asking, let's see, she's with a nonprofit organization housed in a historic school building in Norwich. Does the Preservation League support preservation efforts of organizations, or is it limited to residential homeowners? Thank you for asking. It's actually the reverse. So we do promote the tax credits for historic homeowners, but Preservation League programs are intended for nonprofits and municipalities. So we work primarily with nonprofits and municipalities in our grant program. So thank you for asking. Norwich is on my list of places to go in the next year. Lord willing, when all this blows over and I can make some outreach calls to various parts of the southern tier. But thank you for asking that question from Norwich. And yes, I urge you to check out our grant programs on our website. They may suit your needs. If you're in a historic school building, I bet your needs are many. So feel free to check those out. Thank you, Jessica, for asking. Okay, Darren, feel free to unmute yourself and show us what you got.
Okay, Jana, thank you. I'm going to take over the screen now.
Alrighty.
Okay, my name is Darren Tracy, and I'm a New York State licensed professional engineer, and I've been a contractor for 30 plus years, so I have lots of hands-on practical experience renovating buildings, particularly old buildings. And one thing I want to mention is that the tax credit is not available for your own labor. And Jenna, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It's only available for the materials you buy and the contractors you hire. So if you are, okay, so I just wanted to make that clear. And so I'm going to show you a building that my wife and I renovated in Glens Falls, New York. It was like a 1.5-year project. We bought this building for $1 from the city. They had contracted to demolish the structure. It was in that bad of shape. Initially, we were thinking of having our children involved in this, or grown children, and one of them was going to live there. and we were going to take advantage of the state tax credit, the 20% state tax credit. As it turned out, both our kids had a change of plans and they were not going to be living in the area. So we decided to rent out this property after it was renovated and take advantage of an additional 20% tax credit from the federal government. So that's a 40% tax credit. So if this is a $100,000 renovation project, you get $40,000 off that price tag, which really makes a difference. Okay, that was a before picture. Here's another before picture of the brick wall that has an opening busted clear through it. This is a progress picture of us putting a temporary roof over the top of this cute little 1870s building. Very small. It was a doctor's office, 400 square feet per floor. And then this is the finished product. And we think it came out great. We tried to reuse as many materials as possible, including the historic windows. We kept the slate. We kept as much as we could. Beautiful brickwork, and keeping these materials is conserving energy. Jana referred to embodied energy as the more materials that you can reuse, the more carbon you're saving for the environment, and also you can save money. So that's what we tried to do. So I'm going to start at the basement level and work our way up. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, they can ask them now, or I'm open for questions after this program. You can email me and I will give you 10 minutes, 15 minutes of free time, sharing my experience of renovating over 50 historic buildings, over 50 buildings, most of them historic or older buildings. That information will be at the end of the slide. Okay, so this is the basement, and preserving buildings and taking energy efficiency into account is more than just adding insulation. It's a whole system approach. It's a building science approach. And having an energy audit done, for starters, is a great idea. I think you might be able to get the audits done relatively inexpensively, if not free, through NYSERDA. I know they offered that program in the past, and it's a really good place to start. Okay, so we're down in the basement. There was a concrete floor here, but it was in really bad shape, so we removed it, and we have a dirt floor here. Many old buildings do have dirt floors, so what you want to do is stop the moisture from migrating up through the dirt floor, and you do that by placing a poly, 6mm black poly down, and then pouring concrete over top of that, or you can even use brick pavers, a more cost-effective method. Maybe not as good as a full concrete pour, but that works too. And this is the brick poly to which I referred. Nice laid up stone foundation walls. We didn't have to do much with these. We pointed a little bit, but this is what I'm talking about. This keeps the moisture from wicking up into the building. Very important. And then we're pouring concrete here. We created a little chute and poured a concrete slab down here. Really improved the function of the building. And I want to mention here, down in the basement, this is an important area to insulate. It's called the rim joist or band joist. It's typically a very leaky area around the perimeter of the building, and it's one of the primary areas where you have air infiltration. So you want to take a look at that and insulate that. You can insulate that by caulking, spray foam, pushing rigid insulation up there, or bad insulation. And the reason that's so important is because of a physical phenomenon called stack effect. And this diagram is borrowed from a preservation brief. And what happens is cold air or cool air moves in towards the bottom of the building and exits the top. In from the bottom and exits the top. So if you seal up the bottom, you're minimizing the pressure differential, and you're going to have less air leakage. Another important consideration for renovating historic buildings is dealing with the windows. The windows are very important feature on historic buildings. Often interesting, as is this window. So instead of replacing this window, we repaired it. And this is a photograph of taking the sashes out, repairing them with epoxy. And we re-weather stripped them and reinstalled them, and fairly tight. This particular window does not have a storm window because of the configuration. The rest of the windows in the building do have storms, and old windows that are weather stripped well and have storm windows are fairly energy efficient, and the payback on replacing those with new windows is dozens of years, many years. It's not a good payback. There's work you can do to existing windows to improve the energy efficiency of your home. Okay, this is a picture of the second floor. Just throwing this in here to give you an idea of the deterioration in this particular building. And I want to refer to climate zones in New York State. There are predominantly two climate zones, climate zone 5 and 6. 6 is the blue, 5 is the green. And the latest building code of New York State is 2020. And our value for attic insulation is 49. I mean, that's a really big number, and you should be aware of that as a target goal. However, when renovating historic homes, you do not have to meet current building codes. Particularly with historic homes on the National Register of Historic Places, that would be eligible for this tax credit. All you're required to do is replace the insulation to what was there before or better. You do not need to make current codes. Okay, inside the building on the first floor, I want to give you a practical hands-on example of what we did. This is a brick building. The plaster had fallen off the walls, and it's two withes of brick, W-Y-T-H-E, that's two depths of brick, and they're very unstable. So what we did was we installed 2x4 framing on the interior, and on the back of the 2x4 framing, we spray foamed an adhesive to stabilize the brick walls. Otherwise, they were going to fall down. So it's a spray foam insulation in back of the 2x4s, and I will show you a detail of that in the next slide. And then we added rigid insulation in the bays. Now, this is a very small building. We didn't want to take up interior space, so we used 2x4 framing instead of 2x6, and then used high R insulation. And it worked out very well as a detail. We saved the historic windows and detailed around them. Okay, this is an enlargement of the cavity in between the two studs. Here's one stud, the next stud, and this is a spray foam to which I referred, which effectively glued the studs to the brick wall and stabilized the brick wall. A really important feature of saving this building. And there's a small airspace behind this insulation. And you'll see this is 2 inches of high R. And then we spray foam the perimeter to minimize air infiltration. As Jenna said, air infiltration is a big culprit in heat loss, energy inefficiency of old homes. So you want to tighten up the building as much as you can. So that was one technique that we used that I thought would be helpful to share with you. Okay, on the second floor, this house had been renovated in the 70s, and it goes back to my initial comment of a building science approach, a whole house approach. You have to look at what you're doing and not just add insulation, but make your improvements such that they will withstand the test of time. What happened is that they insulated the attic, and there was no airspace for condensation to be removed from the building, so we had rot. And as you can see here and up here, and the building just basically started falling apart. So what we did on the second floor was we had to replace the roof rafters of this mansard roof, the flat portion of this 1870s Second Empire style mansard roof. And in between the rafters, we added high R insulation. We added 3 layers of 2-inch insulation. So we had 6 inches of high R insulation. And the R value of that is 6 per inch. So 6 times 6 is 36 inches, or 30, an R value of 36. And then we added on the bottom side of the roof rafters another full layer of high R. So we achieved a really high R value on the ceiling. We sealed it up tightly. We created an airspace above the insulation so the roof could breathe, and really improved the energy efficiency of this building. And it should stay there keep the roof repairs going in it, and that should be there another 100+ years. And by the way, this mansard roof had rotted and settled down. We had to detach the mansard roof from the top of the brick structure and jack it up about 6 inches. So it was an extensive project. Wanted to share that with you. Okay, and here's my contact information, Darren at westbranchinc.com. And you can also look at my West Branch Engineering and Consulting page on Facebook. I have tips on historic preservation there. And then with that, I'm going to turn the screen back over to Jana, and she can finish up and we can field any questions.
All right, thank you, Darren. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A. I think there are some takeaways that I would like for you all to keep in mind. So one of the main things that I hope that you'll take from today's presentation is that when it comes to energy upgrades to your historic home, it's a good idea to begin with an energy audit so that you really know you have a professional's input on what your house really needs, where the energy loss is occurring, because some of the best treatments are the simplest treatments. You want your treatments to have the least amount of impact on the historic fabric and materials of your building. It's a good idea, even if you're not pursuing historic tax credits, to follow the Secretary of the Interior standards, the guidelines for sustainability in historic buildings, and to read through the preservation briefs that apply to your project. These will provide valuable guidance, help minimize costly mistakes, and especially when you're working with a historic building, you don't want to make mistakes with that building that are going to result in the irretrievable loss of historic fabric. So, the main intention here is to preserve that historic building, but to rehabilitate it in a way that makes it comfortable to live in and useful for modern life. All right, I'm not seeing any questions coming up. If you do have questions in the future, Darren has shared his contact information. I will share that again in follow-up materials. So you'll all be receiving an email that includes these slides and the links that I've shared with you, and Darren's contact information and my own, which is up on your screen right now. So if you think of any questions later, feel free to contact one of us or both of us. And this presentation will also be available for viewing on the Preservation League's YouTube site. So visit our website. There will be a link there shortly where you can access this presentation. So I just want to thank Darren for joining me today. And thank you all for tuning in. And we do have a couple more webinars coming up in our series. On June 29th, Christina will be presenting New York State Tax Credit Program information, and she'll have guest speaker Jason Yachts from Preservation Studios talking about income producing properties and the state and federal tax credit programs. And then my next virtual office hour will be on July 2nd at 10 a.m. My guest will be Elise Johnson-Schmidt, and we'll be talking about upper floors reuse in historic downtowns. So be sure to tune in. Thank you again, and do one last check for questions. No questions? All right, I hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you, Darren.
To everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.